Hello, and welcome to the Resilient Leader's Journey, a podcast where we navigate the challenging currents of growth and change. If you're enjoying these podcasts, please subscribe. Go ahead, click the like button and subscribe. You can find us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. My guest today, coming to us all the way from Ontario, is Roy Slack. Roy is a professional engineer with over 40 years experience in mine construction, design, and development. He works throughout North America and around the world. He is a graduate of Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. Go Gales! He's been working for the last 30 years for Cementation and presently serves on their board of directors. Notably, in 2008, he was awarded the Engineers Medal for Entrepreneurship by the Professional Engineers of Ontario. Really cool. Roy Slack, thank you for joining. How are you today?
Great, Trent. Thanks for inviting me. You and I have chatted a little bit before, but it's great to spend a little bit more time with you.
Wonderful. The most pressing question I have for you today is that the mascot of Queen's University is Boo Hoo the Bear. Tell me, how much fear does Boo Hoo strike into your rivals?
Yeah, it's certainly a questionable choice for a mascot. I'm on the advisory board of Queen's Engineering, so I have to be careful what I say about their mascot, but I think the engineers might question the choice too.
You would think you'd tough them up a little something, right?
Well, our country's animal's the beavers, so, where do we go from here?
I guess you're right. And I'm sure those were taken already. So, Roy, can you tell us a little about what cementation is, please?
Well, I always explain to people that we build mines because people think about mining companies as the big mining companies out there, but we work for all the different companies. So we work in nickel and copper and potash, gold, silver, you name it. And when a company makes a discovery of a deposit, they call on us to sink the shaft, do the development, to develop the mine so that they can mine it. And sometimes we do contract mining as well, but we are a contractor, a construction company.
I see. Just for perspective, how far down into the ground have you gone with your mine?
We did a shaft in Timmins, I think was just under 3,000 meters deep.
3,000 meters, 10,000 yards-ish. Holy smokes, 2 miles.
Lucky Friday in Idaho. I'm trying to remember the depth of that, but that was a similar depth too. So some pretty deep mines, the deepest ones in North America.
Holy smoke. I have to imagine it is dark. It's another world down 3,000 meters.
It's dark, but I'll tell you something. It's not, people think of underground as being claustrophobic. It's not at all. These are big openings. They're well lit. But when the lights go out, yes, it's very dark.
I can imagine, and a lot of echoes, I'm sure, too. So in your experiences at Cementation, you've had the opportunity to work a lot with the engineers, but you also work with blue-collar workers as well, I would imagine. And so in leadership, is there a difference in how you would lead professional employees versus blue-collar labor employees?
I think, there's two ways to look at this. If you're leading a company and trying to instill a vision and developing a culture, then the answer is no. But if you're managing a group, yes, you have to think about how people are motivated. And what I always wanted to do was align the goals of the company with the goals of the employees. So sometimes those goal sets are different. So it's a yes and no answer to your question, because in one way, you want to establish a culture that is company-wide. But you also have to recognize and it's empathy, right? You have to recognize what drives this employee and what drives this one, and they can be very different motivators.
There's a Professor Daniel Goldman who has a great metaphor. He says, management is a lot like your bag of golf clubs. Each shot requires a different club, and each type of situation of management requires a different tact, correct?
Well, my clubs are unionized and they're on work to rule. I think the reason is that the management is incapable of operating them correctly. So, anyway, I digress. We don't want to talk about my golf game here, Trent.
Oh, no, that's okay. We're very happy to it. One of the items that I read you talked about is that companies should treat profit as an enabler and not as a goal. What does that mean?
This was fundamental to starting cementation, and it derived many years ago when I was with a different company, and we had a chance to do something very unique with the client. The client had actually come to us and said, "We want to do this together like a partnership. Instead of an owner, a contractor, we want to do something different." And the executive said, "Well, this is a very profitable project. We don't want to change what we're doing." And I thought, we're being driven by the wrong things. And so when we started cementation, my concept was that making money was not our end goal. There were a lot of different things. We wanted to make the industry safer. We wanted to create opportunities for our employees. We wanted to reintroduce the industry to design build because I thought that was the best way to do a project. We wanted to do all those things. Those were the goals. But one of the things we had to do in order to do them is be profitable. So the concept was, yes, we need to be in the black. We need to make money to enable us to achieve those goals. And I really think personally, it's the same thing. If you and your family want to make money, you want to do it for a reason. You don't want to just count the bank statement and that it provides opportunities for your kids. It provides a better quality of life, better health, different things. So in everything we do, money is really an enabler. And I think sometimes we lose track of that when we're running a business because so much focus is on, the P&L statement, the balance sheet, whatever. But if your goals, if our company goal was to make lots of money, that's not much of a motivation for our employees. We
Yeah,
wanted to do something that was for our employees.
I know this situation very well, and that good quality, good service, a good product delivered timely ends up yielding above average returns if you do all the first things right and you have well compensated and well treated employees. You get those returns. They don't putting them the other direction, return first, employees second. I've never found to work properly.
No, and I think, the other thing we wanted to do is establish long-term relationships. And that's with our clients, with our employees. We want our employees to stick around, with our partners. Indigenous partnerships are very important in the mining industry, as well as partnerships with suppliers, with subcontractors, other groups. So long-term relationships, if you're looking for a short-term gain, how to bump up that profit margin, that often doesn't align well with, a focus on long-term relationships. So that was another one of our goals. But you have to make money in order to do all those things. So that was where we saw profit as an enabler.
Yeah, it's by the way, yeah, money is nice, and I'd rather have it than not, and I'd rather earn it than not. There's only so much charity that can go, but I agree. If you one of the companies that I worked at for quite a long time, we made ourselves employee owned. So the employees had a financial stake in the outcome of the company, and it added as a motivation. At Cementation, what's the average tenure there? Is that a couple of years, or is that most people come in and that's a career for them?
Yeah, it's whenever someone leaves, I say a former and future employee. Because something interesting happens. We've had some people leave that have come back. And, that's understandable. If people see an opportunity, because I went through that too. The Godfather opportunity, an offer you can't refuse type thing. But tenure in general has been very long. We promote from within. For example, Eric Kodakangas, who's Executive VP of Canadian Operations, he was one of the 4 people I brought in at the start, so in 1998. So he's been there from day one, and a few other people have too. Retirees, it's hard to retire in our industry. That's what I've found.
That's another Godfather. They keep pulling me back.
Yeah, they ask me if I'm retired, and I say, well, I'm tired. But what we also find, especially in engineering, is that people that retire keep working for us on special projects. And yeah, so I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but I do know there's a lot of long-term employees.
And I was asking more just to get a feel. I didn't know if it was because it's a very challenging job, but not at the professional level, but certainly at the laboring level, that causes turnover and that makes you have to think about managing and leading that differently. Or people look at this and they find value in their work and want to stay longer, and because benefits are good and pay is good and there's a rewarding output.
We, one of the things when I talk about culture, and certainly safety is what people recognize in our culture. I visited one project and there was, for lack of a better word, a wall of shame. Okay. So what the owner had done, they had put up pictures of things that had gone wrong. And it was to remind people, don't do this again.
My gosh.
I had one of the miners come up to me and he said, and I still remember this, he said, you break 99 rounds right to the face, nobody says anything. You have one misfire, you get your ass kicked. And that was a wake-up moment on that. That project had poor morale. And we sat down with the owner and said, let's change it. Let's focus on positive recognition. There's so many things happening right on this job, but everyone's focused on a few things that aren't going the way they should be. And the owner bought into that. Like we didn't battle. They said, yeah, that makes sense. And you could see within a couple months the whole morale change on that project. So when our field people go to a project, first thing they ask about these days, the Wi-Fi. Interesting enough, it's a remote project because that's how they keep in touch with their family. The food's important, money's important, the turnaround. When I started, it was 60 days in, 2 weeks out. That was on a remote project that I went to. That was my turnaround. Today we have 2 weeks in, 2 weeks out, 3 weeks in, 3 weeks out. And so that it's a whole different family life, and it's still a life choice. It's still different than getting home every night for dinner and seeing the kids. But these are the things that are important to our employees on projects, and certainly the morale on the project, but safety first and foremost.
I preach safety to my employees. I would say, I don't accept that you had an injury because you had the wrong tool. Raise your hand, ask for the right tool, and we'll put you in the right spot, or the right equipment. Having it wrong, but this change, I want to go back to the change of culture where you had the signs on the wall of things to do wrong, which is essentially hitting people over the dog with the newspaper constantly. How long did that culture change take? And how did employees start to buy into it?
We learned a lot about culture change from safety. And when I started in the industry, there was this mentality that someone was going to get hurt, hope it's not me, okay? And we started going into rules and regulations, establishing a culture of compliance. So you have to do this. The transition came when we started to look at things in terms of a culture of commitment. So compliance is rules, regulations, procedures, but commitment is people doing things for the right reason. We started talking about injuries and how they impact not only yourself, but your family. And like you said, speaking out, not being afraid to say if you saw something that was unsafe. That was and I'm talking about the industry in general, not just cementation, but that was a long culture change. And, one thing we learned, it was driven by, like I can go up and give a speech about safety as the leader of the company. And that's great for a day. But the safety culture on site is driven by the site management, the site supervisors. And one of our miners told me an interesting thing. He said, it's the shift boss that creates the safety culture on the site. But management's letting him do it. So we're all complicit. If it's good, we're complicit. If it's bad, we are too. So we learned a lot about culture in our safety journey from compliance to commitment. We begin to look at that culture change in other areas as well. How do you get people to do things because they want to?
Love this concept of compliance to commitment. And so as senior management, you make this strategic choice and you bring it down to shift managers. How do you train people on this and say, we want to change culture. I need you to help lead us there?
One of the important things is establishing a culture of reporting. So you alluded to that a little earlier, is raise your hand if you see something that's unsafe. That certainly wasn't the way it was in the old days. But we encourage reporting. We talk about proactive or leading indicators in safety. So it's not about just reporting how many injuries, but it's talking about near misses and how we can make sure they don't happen again. And it is about a culture of reporting. So you're not going to hurt your career by reporting. That used to be the way it was, oh, he's just a complainer. Now we recognize people positively for identifying safety issues on projects. So it's not a case of we reward people for being proactive. So that's building that culture of reporting. And sometimes it's challenging, quite honestly, because all the work we do is a partnership between owner, contractor, sometimes engineering groups, sometimes indigenous partners. So it's not just cementation in the game, it's a wider group, and we have to instill that culture on the total group.
Sure. This concept of reporting near misses and reporting potential, it is a culture. So for example, in late 2019, Dr. An, who worked in a lab in Wuhan, China, knew there was a virus. Okay. And the culture there was don't raise your hand, because she's seen other doctors when they had SARS 15 years ago raise their hand, they get put in a truck and taken away and they don't see them again.
Yeah, that's not good.
Not a good plan.
Yeah, so, not a good career plan.
We've not on this podcast talked about near misses, but it is certainly something I've worked with quite a bit. Can you just describe that a little bit better? For what does that mean, a near miss, and what's a near miss reporting?
Well, I'll tell you, maybe not exactly what you're asking, but I've got a story for you about, we did, one of the safety shares we do is called accident imaging. Okay. So what I do, Trent, is I ask you to write down something that could happen at your place of work, what the consequences would be if that did happen, and what we can do to prevent it. Okay. So that's taking a hypothetical situation, but in a real workplace, and thinking through how we can prevent it. So, and this was for anything. So one of the guys, I was running a shift, this was years ago, it was the back shift, and I was, anyway, I won't get into why I was running it and running the company too, but that's another story. A young miner came in, and his accident imaging was, after the 5th or 6th beer, use a bottle opener. Okay. And the potential consequence was cutting your hand on the cap. And how to prevent it is to use a bottle opener. And as he was saying this, you could see this big white bandage on his hand. Okay. So that was an epiphany for me, because what I started realizing, these imagings weren't imagined. These are things that had happened to people, right? Which makes sense. It's easier for someone to recount a potential incident that actually happened than it is to imagine one. So then the next step was, how do we deal with these accident imagings? Because some of them could have been non-reported real incidents. But encouraging people. So after that, I went up to the guy, and he was a young guy, and I said, great imaging. And I said, from now on, I'm going to use an opener. And, I just encouraged him. Some people would say, why didn't you talk about mining or whatever? Enabling people to talk about potential incidents by actually setting it up as part of your safety program, and then encouraging them when they do it, is just one of the ways that we can get some leading indicators.
Sure. One of the first experiences I had with that, and I was in my first controllership, I'd gone on the floor and we were thermoforming plastic. So these big machines, thermoforming plastic. And the gentleman, the operator, Miguel, was under the machine, and he had taken off a line that had antifreeze, and he starts blowing into it. And I'm looking, what are you doing? Well, there's a clog in here. I go, do you think putting your mouth, where you can catch antifreeze back into your throat is a good choice here? She goes, well, but I have to get the machine running. And so we worked backwards from that, from the amount of time it takes to reset the machine versus the risk potentially. And this was a near miss. And it was my first example of, a bad choice that somebody's making. The worker wants the best outcome, but is trying to find the shortcut through it as opposed to understanding it. You would agree, management would take the extra time to make sure the machine works right, as opposed to shortcutting it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I can tell you lots of stories. In fact, I wrote a paper for CIM and for SME on 40 years of safety shares. And a lot of it is my earlier experiences as I want to say naive, not unintelligent, a naive young engineer.
Okay.
Who did some things probably shouldn't have done. And I've been lucky in my career because there were some near misses. Hopefully by sharing them, people learn from them.
Well, I hope they certainly do that. Right. I have one last question for you today. Other than, in fact, let me just stop for a second. You and I connected that you're involved with cranky old men drinking beer. It's too juicy for me not to ask you what that is. Are you a cranky old man, and do you drink beer?
Well, I'm not very cranky when I drink beer, I'll tell you that. The story behind that, there's 5 of us that played high school basketball together 50 years ago. And we had tickets to the Raptors game in Toronto. We go to a game every year. We go to a Blue Jays game, but we always go to 1 or 2 basketball games. And 2 days before the game, the season was canceled due to COVID. So we went up to my cottage and we're drinking a few beers, and we were kind of pissed off because we missed the game, and it was a bit of a tradition for us. And I think I mentioned, we're just cranky old men drinking beer. And when we get together, we would always get a few different beers and review them. And so we started an internal website, and then we took it in external. It's just a hobby, but there's lots of it's been running for 4 or 5 years now. There's lots of content on it. We have fun with it.
What's the website? What's the website address?
comdb.ca.
Okay, .ca, right, Canadian.
Yeah.
Funny.
But if you search cranky old men, you'll probably find it.
Or you're going to get a very different site, which we won't want them to go to.
We don't put ads on. We just do it for fun. We don't make any money from it. And there's a spot there for guest reviews. If anyone wants to send in their, what we call good reviews is a testimonial. Bad reviews are a public service announcement, right? So we're happy to get both.
Roy, my last question for you today. Who is your favorite fictional character?
Well, full disclosure, because you had mentioned this previously, and I thought about it, and I thought about Rick Blaine. And people may not recognize the name unless they are fans of the movie.
Doesn't add up to a hill of beans.
Exactly. And I thought about, I love the movie. First of all, it's a great movie, one of the greatest movies of all time. But as an employer, I don't know if you remember when the fat man offered Sam twice what Rick was paying him. And Sam said, no, I want to stay here. And his employees are incredibly loyal. He's good to people. When it comes right down to it, he does the right thing. Anyway, of course, he's a fictional character. Bogart does a great Rick. Everyone wants, what do they say in one part? Every man wants to be Rick. Every woman wants to be with Rick. That's where that started. That's not why I picked him, Trent. That's not the reason. For his management skills.
I'll say this. Here's looking at you.
Okay, yeah. Well, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship, Trent.
Yes, okay. By the way, AFI would have that as the most quoted movie of all time.
Yeah, I would believe it.
He is a great character, right? If you played it for her, you can play it for me. Well, Roy Slack, this has been a great time. I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for the invite, Trent. I enjoyed it. We could have gone on for hours and hours, I'm sure.
I'm sure, but I'd become a cranky old man drinking beer right then, actually. Folks, resilient leaders face challenging currents, and it's tough navigating. But with one tack or another, we can get there together. Again, if you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe. Go tell a friend about it so they can catch on the joy as well. We look forward to seeing you next time. Be well. Bye, Roy.